Welcome to the Alyosha Society, where we are pursuing truth, beauty, and goodness through great literature. This is the third of 5 total videos on our first poetry unit. Once again, you knew that, didn't you? Pink shirt, poetry, giant Easter egg. So in the first couple of videos, we talked about poetry in general. We then introduced Anne Bradstreet, and we've been talking about Anne Bradstreet, her time period. We're also going to be talking about John Milton, but we won't be in Milton until the next video. We're going to do a little bit more Bradstreet in this video. So let's get right to it, friends. Little recap. I hope that you're remembering all of the kinds of poetry we've been talking about. 1/3 of the Bible, Hebrew poetry, all about parallelisms. And it's not sounds that rhyme, but rather what? Ideas. Synonymous parallelism, antithetical parallelism. There's another called synthetic parallel. There's all kinds of cool parallelisms. It'll help you understand God's word a lot better. Secondly, epic poetry, EPIC, extremely long poem about an incredible hero, highlights a culture. Aeneid, Iliad, Odyssey, epic poetry, Homer and Virgil, but there are other epics as well. Italian poetry with the terza rima. We read some Dante. Sonnet poetry, 14 lines, iambic pentameter. Love Shakespeare's sonnets, been studying them for years. But remember, guys, with each of these different types of poetry, the whole idea is that the genre, the specific type of poetry, dictates the rules. It's structured in a certain way. So if you know that ahead of time, you can ask intelligent questions like, why would the poet have chosen that particular format and specific style of poetry? And how does that particular type of poetry best suit what this poet is doing? Before we dive back into Anne Bradstreet, I want to mention something that I failed to mention earlier, and that is the role of the poet. The role of the poet throughout history. In ancient times, the poet was viewed very differently than we view poets today. What do I mean by that? Well, if you look at the beginnings of the great epics, once again, Iliad, Odyssey, Aeneid in particular, you'll notice that they begin with an appeal to the muses. So the poet is saying to these goddesses, these daughters of Zeus, the 9 muses, particularly the muse of poetry, come and fill me and inspire me to write this poem. And it's very similar to the way we might pray today and say, you know, God, through your Holy Spirit, fill me and speak through me. It's very similar to that. But because of that, the poets in the ancient world were viewed as being inspired by the gods. And so people put the poets way up here on this very high pedestal in a similar way that you and I might think about Jeremiah or Isaiah or Micah in the Old Testament, that they're speaking the words of God. Now, again, we don't view poets that way today. We say maybe something like, oh, that's an inspiring song, or that's a very inspirational poem. But we don't mean exactly the same thing. But throughout history, poets have been viewed in one way or another as people of inspiration of some kind or another. All right, back to Anne Bradstreet. You remember that we got a number of poems of Bradstreet that we're going to be talking about. We've already read and discussed To My Dear and Loving Husband. What a refreshing view of marriage, of the relationship between man and woman, in many ways somewhat foreign to our 21st century culture. That's just because we've shifted. We've shifted very much away from a biblical worldview of these things, marriage and the roles of men and women and so forth, but a very refreshing and inspiring poem. In this lesson, we're going to take a look at 2 poems, Upon the Burning of Our House and The Author to Her Book. two of her very well-known poems. And I think I mentioned to you that I want you to read Contemplations. It's another really good example of Bradstreet's poetry, but I'm not going to discuss it in the video. We might talk about it if you're doing the live class. So let's get right to it. Verses upon the burning of our house. This one is a little bit longer. So instead of putting it up on the screen here, I'm just going to share my screen and we're going to look at it online. So hang tight for that. Questions to think about as we read this poem. So let's, as we read the poem, of course, remember, we're going to stick with our historical biographical approach. So we're going to be talking about, well, what actually happened that caused Anne Bradstreet to write a poem about the burning of a house. Then we're going to look at meter and rhyme scheme. Let's see if we can look at the poem and detect how did Anne Bradstreet structure this poem and why would that be an effective way to do it? What is the tone and the mood of the poem? Poets are known for being able to express a tone and or a mood in a way that maybe other kinds of writers just don't do. What exactly happens in the poem? How does she process the tragedy that she's talking about? And you know, these are just good questions. Some of these are just generally good questions to ask about any piece of literature. What does it tell us about God? And what does it tell us about the writer? What does it tell us about Anne Bradstreet? So, no, we want to get that far yet. So keep those in mind. Meter, mood, tone, what's going on? How does she process it? What does it tell us about God and the poet? So, all right, bear with me here. Give me just a second. And I'm going to pull that up so we can take a look. It's a little bit longer. That's the whole thing. So bear with me. There we go. Hopefully you can see this now. Now, before we get started, this poem is a little bit, this one kind of hits close to home, pun intended. What do I mean by that? Well, what happened to Anne Bradstreet happened to me. Yeah, just a few years ago, our house burned and we basically lost everything. We were displaced for a year. They had to rebuild the structure from the inside, and we lost our stuff. So that's what happened to Anne Bradstreet. Apparently on July the 10th, 1666, kind of an ominous year, isn't it? 666. Anyway, I'm not superstitious. I don't think that has anything to do with it. But her house burned and she lost all of her stuff. And she decided to work through the tragedy by expressing her thoughts and her feelings in her art, in her poetry. So let's take a look at it. I'm going to read it out loud and then we'll kind of talk through it. In silent night when rest I took, for sorrow near I did not look. I'm going to bed. I'm not really anticipating anything bad's going to happen. I wakened, was with thundering noise and piteous shrieks of dreadful voice. That fearful sound of fire and fire, let no man know, is my desire. People were yelling fire in the streets. She's just waking up. I, starting up, the light did spy, and to my God, my heart did cry to straighten me in my distress and not leave me succorless. Means without aid, without hope. Then coming out, behold a space, the flame consumed my dwelling place. And when I could no longer look, I blessed his name that gave and took, that laid my goods now in dust. Yea, so it was, and so 'twas just. It was his own, it was not mine, far be it that I should repine. He, you know who the he's talking about here, don't you, class? He's talking about God, yeah. He might of all justly be reft, but yet sufficient for us left. When by the ruins oft I passed, my sorrowing eyes aside did cast, and here and there the places spy where oft I sate and long did lie. Here stood that trunk, and there that chest. There lay that store I counted best. My pleasant things in ashes lie, and them behold no more shall I. Under thy roof no guest shall sit, nor at thy table eat a bit. No pleasant talk shall e'er be told, nor things recounted done of old. No candle e'er shall shine in thee, nor bridegroom's voice e'er heard shall be. In silence ever shalt thou lie. Adieu, adieu, all's vanity. Remember, she knew French. She throws a little French in here. Then straight I 'gan my heart to chide, and did thy wealth on earth abide? Didst fix thy hope on moldering dust? The arm of flesh did make thy trust? Raise up thy thoughts above the sky, that dunghill mists away may fly. Thou hast a house on high erect, framed by that mighty architect. With glory richly furnished, stands permanent, though this be fled. It's purchased and paid for too by him who hath enough to do, a price so vast as is unknown, yet by his gift is made thine own. Thine own, sorry. There's wealth enough. I need no more. Farewell, my pelf. Farewell, my store. The world no longer let me love. My hope and treasure lies above. Wow. Wow. I mean, the last two lines alone, she loses everything in this house fire. She works through it. Yes, there's grief. You can't hide that. But in the end, what does she conclude? The world no longer let me love. My hope and treasure lies above. So this house fire, this tragedy, this event that caused her to lose everything, she's thankful for it because it forced her to realize that earthly things are just things. This is not our final home. It all belongs to God anyway. And my treasure is not here, it's there. Yeah. Let's take a look through it. Remember some of the questions that we, tone, mood. Well, let's look at meter and rhyme scheme. In silent night when rest I took. For sorrow near did not look. Okay, so we don't have an iambic pentameter here, do we? No, we have, I think we have more like 8 syllables per line instead of 10. What about the rhyme scheme? This is pretty simple. Took, look, noise, voice, fire, desire, spy, cry, distress. You see that? Pretty simple, isn't it? Write it out. I don't want to just spoon feed it to you. AA, BB, CC, DD, EE, FF, and so on. Pretty simple rhyme scheme. Tone, mood, God, poet. So the poem clearly starts in a startling manner, doesn't it? You can almost sort of relate to being awakened, maybe not to a house fire, but when you wake up and something's going on and it was chaos and what's going on? Yeah. Pretty crazy when it's a house fire. So she captures that urgency and that almost that sense of panic. People are screaming fire, fire. And what's the first thing she did? To my God, my heart did cry. See, guys, you can't fake that. That was a reflex. That's just automatically where she went. Straight to God. I mean, again, you can't fake that. That has to be a habit. That has to be something that you cultivate in your life, that when you experience some sort of tragedy, the first thing you do is cry out to God. Because she says she knew that he wouldn't leave her without aid. And she goes on to say things like, I bless his name that gave and took. This is sort of like Job. From dust I came, to dust I shall return. Yeah, I didn't have anything when I came here. Who cares if I don't have anything when I leave? It's all God's. My sorrowing, when by the ruins oft I pass, my sorrowing eyes aside to cast. She's not denying that this hurts. You see, I think that's important. Sometimes we go through, we go through tragedy, we go through hard times, and we want to sort of put on this super spiritual, smiley face, like, oh, look at me, I just trust God. I just love God. And well, you know what? That's all true. But biblically speaking, when you see people in Scripture going through misery and pain and suffering, David's a good example. Read the Psalms. The person acknowledges, that's a healthy thing to do, acknowledges the pain and suffering, but also acknowledges, you know what? God's in control. I like that. I like that. My pleasant things in ashes lie, and them behold no more shall I. My stuff is all gone. It's all burned up. Yeah. In silence, ever shalt thou lie, adieu, adieu, all's vanity. Then straight again my heart to chide, and did thy wealth on earth abide? Hey, then I started thinking through, she says, is this really where my treasure lies? Wow. And then she works through it. She works through it. It's purchased and paid for too by him, reference to God, who hath enough to do, a price so vast as is unknown, yet by his gift is made thine own. We've been given every good and perfect gift from above. Therefore, the world no longer let me love. My hope and treasure lies above. I like this one. I like this one. And you know, guys, this is the kind of thing where, you know, you pull this out when you're going through a tragedy in your life. You know what I'm saying? You pull this out and you say, oh yeah, you know, that was inspiring. That was helpful. I don't know how she had the strength to do that, but I kind of need that. And I'm going to go that. Of course you go to Scripture. Of course you read the Psalms of lament when you're struggling. But a poem like this might also be inspiring and helpful to you as another person who is also a sinful, fallen, flawed human being, had a horrible thing that happened to her, and she processed it and worked through it. And through that process, through her art, through the beauty of her poetry, she works through the tragedy. And it can still speak to people hundreds of years later who are going through similar tragedies. Good. I like that. I like it a lot. Okay, we're going to look at another Anne Bradstreet poem in this lesson. Let's see where we end up. Verses. Okay. Yep. We already did this one. Sorry. Let's move on to the author to her book. See if I can get that one up for you. Now, I'm going to help you out a little bit with this one. This one just fascinates me as a bibliophile, as someone who's obsessed with literature and books. This one is about books, but it's about the author's relationship to, in this case, her offspring, to her child. But it's not one of her 8 children. In this case, the child that she is giving birth to, in a sense, is her writing, her book. So enough, let's read it, and then we'll sort of use the same kinds of questions that we've been using to think about it and analyze it and enjoy it. She says, the author of to her book, thou ill-formed offspring of my feeble brain, who after birth didst by my side remain, till snatched from thence by friends less wise than true, who thee abroad exposed to public view, made thee in rags, halting the press to trudge, where errors were not lessened, all may judge. At thy return, my blushing was not small. My rambling brat in print, should mother call, I cast thee by as one unfit for light. Thy visage was so irksome in my sight, yet being mine own, at length affection would thy blemishes amend, if so I could. I washed thy face, but more defects I saw, and rubbing off a spot still made a flaw. I stretched thy joints to make thee even feet, yet still thou runst more hobbling than is meet. In better dress to trim thee was my mind, but naught save homespun cloth in the house I find. In this array mongst vulgars mayst thou roam. In critics' hands beware thou dost not come. And take thy way where yet thou art not known. If for thy father asked, say thou hast none. And for thy mother, she alas is poor, which caused her thus to send thee out of door. I hope the brief comments before reading the poem were helpful. The title, I think, is helpful. You guys are smart folks. You would have figured this out. But when you read the first line and you see offspring and ill-formed, you think, oh my, is she talking about the fact that she gave birth to a child that maybe had some severe birth defects or physical maladies or something like that? No. She's not talking about physically giving birth. So this is a great time to talk about literary devices and imagery. In what sense does an author give birth? Think about that. Yeah. If you're thinking, well, an author produces an idea, produces this thing called this work of art, whether it's a poem or a novel or whatever the case may be. And in that sense, it's sort of like his or her child. It's his or her offspring. But notice the humility that Anne Bradstreet expresses here at the beginning of the poem. My feeble brain. Oh, I've given birth to this ill-formed offspring of my feeble brain who after birth just by my side remained. And here it is, I'm kind of stuck looking at this. She's not happy with her own work, is she? She's given birth to this thing, this work of art, and she's not happy with it. Till snatched from thence by friends less wise than true, who thee abroad expose. And so, you know, the artist, the author is putting herself out there because, you know, you give birth to this thing, then and it's published and it's out there. If it's ugly, then it's a reflection on you, isn't it? Made thee in rags, halting to the press to judge, where errors were not lessened, all may judge. So, and you know, she talks about her blushing was not small. My rambling brat in print should mother call. She calls her offspring here her brat. I cast thee by as one unfit for life. I don't want to claim this child. I think I can relate to that. I'm just kidding. I'm not saying that about all of my children, just one or two of them. Come on, lighten up, guys. I love all five of my kids. Let me see, where are we? Yet being mine own at length, affection would thy blemishes amend, if so I could. So, seems like she's really wrestling through, you know, you're imperfect, but you're still mine. I washed thy face, but more defects I saw, and rubbing off a spot still made a flaw. And I'm trying to clean this thing up, but I don't know. It's still, Stretch thy joints to make thee even feet, yet still thou runst more hobbling than is meet. It's still a crippled, lame kind of thing. In better dress to trim thee was my mind, but not save homespun cloth in the house I find. She's trying all these different ways to patch this thing up. In this array, months vulgars mayest thou roam, in critics' hands beware, thou dost not come. Oh, you see, the author knows the debilitating effects of the critic. Oh, when people start criticizing my work, that's going to be tough. And take thy way where yet thou art not known. If for thy father asked, say thou hadst none. Well, yeah, this is a child that has a mother but no father. Of course, Anne Bradstreet's offspring, it's her work. And for thy mother, she alas is poor, which caused her thus to send thee out of door. Anyway, I thought you guys would enjoy this one. This one's got a little bit of humor, but also very serious, expressing, if you're a painter or a poet or a musician, if you do any kind of art where you put yourself out there and you write a song or you write a novel, whatever it is, you build something, and you're putting yourself out there for criticism. And you also know that you're probably going to be your own worst critic. You're probably going to be more harsh on yourself than other people will be. But it still kind of stings when other people are harsh about your work. Okay, well, let's wrap up. Remember, friends, that we are examining poetry using the historical biographical approach. And by now, you're probably hearing this in your sleep. Author, reason, audience, time period, genre. So now that brings us to John Milton. We've used these principles. We've looked at different kinds of poetry, and we've looked at rhyme schemes and meter and so forth. And I hope you've enjoyed just this very, very small little slither, the example of Anne Bradstreet's poetry. But here's what I hope for way more than that you've been inspired to read more Anne Bradstreet. I know I have been. I think she's an intriguing, fascinating, intelligent woman who has a lot to say to us today about the same issues that we deal with, that she so eloquently expresses herself in her art, and her place in history is settled. That brings us, though, to an individual who was living at the same time. They were almost the same age, actually. John Milton. John Milton, however, born in England, stayed in England. I'm getting ahead of myself. We'll do John Milton in the next two videos. So I told you I'm trying to get these a little shorter, and I think I've been somewhat successful after that gargantuan opening video. Anyway, see you guys in the next video. We'll get into Milton then.